When we talk about components of the Earth's climate system, we have to discuss the lithosphere and its role. The lithosphere represents land that's absorbing and returning solar energy as a black body. In reality, the Earth is a gray body, which is a partially functional black body. Radiation passes through the atmosphere with relatively little interference. It strikes the Earth's surface. It is absorbed with 100% efficiency and re-emitted as a longer wavelength that is proportional to the surface temperature of the Earth. Topography is going to affect how the wind moves around the Earth. We saw, again turning to Mount Everest video, you see the effect of the jet stream on people that are climbing well up into the troposphere. That topography is going to steer winds around high points, and if the wind is forced over highlands, like we see in the west coast of North America in the Cascade Mountains, that forcing of the air over those mountains cools the air off, and that cold air condenses as precipitation. So we have lots of rain on the west coast and a rain shadow on the east side of the Cascades. Volcanism can affect the atmospheric dust level. Now, normally this only lasts for a couple years, but if the volcanic eruption is strong enough to blast material into the stratosphere where the air isn't overturning, where it's stable, that dust tends to stay there for a long time. It could be there for years to decades. Also to consider in the Earth's climate system is the biosphere. This is all organisms in the Earth system. It would include plants and animals, as well as microbes that are both marine and terrestrial. Here we have a depiction of the global distribution of biomass. You'll notice the high biomass regions in the water are denoted by the red colors here. And if you know something about these locations, they are the mouths of very large rivers. The mouth of the Amazon here is pouring nutrients from the entire Amazon basin into the Atlantic Ocean. The Mississippi River is taking moisture and nutrients from this region of North America and dumping it into the Gulf of Mexico. See some other bright red spots here that include the very productive lakes of central Manitoba and Great Slave Lake, Great Bear Lake, also productive up here in the Canadian Arctic because they have large rivers, again, flowing into them. We can see instances of upwelling at the high latitudes that are going to be associated with high levels of biological productivity. Same goes for Siberia. The large Siberian rivers that pour into the Arctic Ocean are going to result in very productive regions. On the land surface, the most productive regions are those that receive lots of moisture. So the Amazon rainforest here in South America, the deciduous forest of the eastern US and Canada here, and then the boreal forest of northern Canada and Europe as well as Asia over here, where it's called the taiga. So those are very productive regions associated with lots of precipitation. Other regions are void of productivity, either here in the Sahara because it's dry, or out here in the center of the Atlantic because it's nutrient free. Same goes with the Central Pacific, both in the Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere. Now this brings us to the greenhouse effect. We talked about this in black body radiation videos. We start out with solar energy output. About 50% of this energy reaches the Earth as visible light. There's a small amount reaching the Earth as infrared radiation, but the Earth is producing infrared radiation by taking that short wavelength radiation and re-emitting it as longer infrared radiation. Ultraviolet radiation is ionizing radiation. Again, it causes genetic damage, which leads to skin cancers and sunburn. This ultraviolet radiation, when it does strike the Earth's surface, if it makes it through the atmosphere, if it makes it through the ozone layer, it's going to be absorbed and then re-emitted as infrared radiation. The solar radiation energy balance we saw again in the blackbody radiation video is about 342 watts per meter squared. That's for a rotating sphere. The planet Earth absorbs and radiates exactly this amount in order to maintain this balance. So we have solar energy coming to the Earth's surface, in this case the surface of the atmosphere. On average, 342 watts per meter squared. There is some heat coming out of the Earth. We can see that in volcanic activity, the activity of the mid-ocean ridges. that heat is going to represent a very small contribution to the Earth's climate system, 0.06 watts per meter squared, so not really significant. In order to maintain a constant temperature on the Earth, the heat radiating from the Earth must balance precisely the solar input. Now, if the Earth had no greenhouse gases, it would be a very different place. The greenhouse gases that are most important for us are water vapor and carbon dioxide. Methane is also important. Those trap outgoing solar radiation. That is, radiation that comes from the sun, strikes the Earth, gets absorbed and re-emitted as longer wavelength radiation that has a wavelength that's very exciting to greenhouse gases. So those greenhouse gases respond by vibrating and rotating at a higher rate, thereby becoming warmer. Without these gases, the energy emitted from the Earth would go directly back into space. It would not warm the atmosphere because those gases are not susceptible to those wavelengths. They're not excited by those wavelengths. The Earth's atmosphere behaves as a greenhouse in that the solar energy passes through the atmosphere, and some of it is going to be trapped on its way back out. So it passes through without warming the atmosphere much, strikes the Earth's surface, gets absorbed, re-emitted at a longer wavelength, warming the atmosphere, making it at least 33 degrees warmer than it would be without those gases. So we're going to balance the system through a series of feedbacks. These include positive feedbacks and negative feedbacks. Positive feedback scenario would be increase insolation, thereby increasing evaporation of seawater, putting more water vapor in the atmosphere, because water vapor is a very effective greenhouse gas that further warms the atmosphere, resulting in more evaporation, resulting in more water vapor, resulting in a stronger greenhouse effect. A negative feedback, looking at the same system, would be increasing radiation results in increased evaporation. More water vapor in the atmosphere becomes buoyant. That buoyant water vapor in the atmosphere rises and forms clouds. Those clouds reflect incoming radiation, cooling the atmosphere, reducing evaporation, reducing the amount of clouds. And clouds happen to be a very difficult thing to make with a computer. It's hard to make clouds, and once you've made clouds in a computer model, it's hard to get rid of them. Feedbacks that can significantly affect the temperatures achieved by this radiation balance include water vapor feedback, as we just mentioned, albedo feedback, which we also mentioned in a cursory way. More dramatically, it would be snow cover versus forest cover. Snow is going to tend to reflect incoming radiation without allowing it to turn into blackbody radiation. A dark forest absorbs more radiation, making the Earth more effective as a blackbody. This radiation feedback is going to be an important component of any climate model. Making clouds, getting rid of clouds, changing the color of the Earth's surface from agriculture or deforestation. Plant growth feedback then comes into play. When plants grow, they make the Earth's surface dark, absorbing more incoming radiation, emitting more blackbody radiation, warming the lower atmosphere, potentially resulting in more plant growth. We can see that here in a very simple way. We have incoming solar radiation, again at 342 watts per meter squared. Don't worry about these numbers because they're all weird. Always, every diagram I've seen like this. Make it crazy. So the simple stuff is all we need to worry about here. Incoming radiation strikes the Earth. It's absorbed and re-emitted as longer wavelength radiation that gets these greenhouse gases excited. They vibrate and spin at a higher rate, and as they spin at a higher rate, they're going to store that heat, and although they're going to lose some of that heat back into space, other heat is going to be re-radiated back downward, which brings us to climate models. Now that we have an understanding of the greenhouse effect, we need to put it into play. We need to mess around with it to determine what it's going to do to us or for us in the future. So here we have a picture of a general circulation model. Now that we have an understanding of the greenhouse effect, we can start to model it and come up with some plan for what it's going to do to us or for us in the future, given our activities. This is a figure of a general circulation model. Now you'll see GCM used regularly in climate change papers. It can either mean global climate model or general circulation model, usually. So this is a general circulation model of the Earth, which is fairly simple. It's looking at temperatures and wind directions. We can ramp this complexity up as much as our computer speed and sophistication of our models will allow. Here we have an illustration that depicts the changes that we've made, the increases in complexity that we've added to global climate models over the last 50 years or so. In the mid-70s, we were mostly concerned with acid rain that resulted from CO2 emissions and sulfur dioxide emissions from coal power plants. We eliminated much of the acid rain problem in that 50-year period. We've moved on to including cloud complications in the 80s. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, it's very difficult to generate clouds mathematically in these computer models, and once you've developed clouds, it's difficult to mathematically remove them from the simulations. By the first assessment report, FAR, we were adding the influence of the ocean, but this is a stagnant ocean. It's merely a repository for greenhouse gases. By the time the second assessment report came out in 1995, we began to add ocean circulation. We also increased the chemical components in this particular climate model. By the time the third assessment report came out, TAR, in 2001, we had incorporated the carbon cycle, the influence of rivers, overturning ocean circulation, cycling nutrients, and also cycling greenhouse gases. We added the importance of aerosols. By the time the fourth assessment report came out, we further increased our chemical activity in these climate models, and we've incorporated vegetation in a more active way in how these components interact with one another to generate the climate that we observe in the world today. We've gone through a fifth assessment report in 2014, I believe, and we're working on the sixth now. It should come out next year.
Dr. Ferrier, it's Ofhard. I'm sorry. That's all right. A lot of people mispronounce it, but it sounds just the way it's spelled. H-F-U-H-R-U-H-U-R-R. Ofhard. That's good. You just went a little past it there. Just put the brakes on.
So starting out in a simple scenario is how all models start out. This is what I would call kind of a tube model, 1D radiative convection model. This is what the early researchers back in the 1800s, 1896, when the first CO2 climate change paper started to come out. Here we have incoming shortwave solar radiation striking the top of the atmosphere. It's passing through air that contains oxygen and nitrogen, not interacting with those appreciably. It continues on through air containing carbon dioxide, water vapor, and aerosols. Those are mostly going to be in the troposphere. Once the radiation strikes the Earth's surface, here, it's going to be absorbed with 100% efficiency for our purposes and re-emitted as longer wavelength radiation. This longer wavelength radiation is going to move back up into the atmosphere where it's going to run into the CO2, water vapor, methane, and aerosols and excite them. When it excites these molecules, it warms the atmosphere. So these early models began by stacking a bunch of reactive boxes, again, one dimension, and studying how that would change. The very clear early results were that adding greenhouse gases warms the atmosphere significantly. The next step was to take these vertical tubes and link them together horizontally. So we have a surface, just like we did in the tube model. We have boxes of air containing various substances above that radiative body here. And now we're going to link one tube to the next tube, to the next tube, to the next tube. And all these stacked boxes are also going to be linked in multiple directions. Much like a Rubik's Cube, each of these is going to interact with the one next to it. Now we can increase this further by adding more boxes, in this case all around the world. So we have vertical boxes that are divided up based on height or pressure, and we have horizontal boxes that are based on latitude and longitude. So by adding more boxes, we increase the complexity. And by increasing the complexity, we increase the amount of supercomputer time that's needed to run these models. The grid cells that are used by climate models and the climatic processes that the model will calculate for each cell is illustrated here. By increasing the spatial resolution of climate models, we increase the ability to evaluate the influence of greenhouse gases, ocean circulation, aerosols, dust, all these other components of the climate system. So starting out in 1990, we have Europe here, Greenland here. Iceland does not exist. By 1995, Iceland existed as two boxes. Svalbard appears as two boxes. And the Mediterranean Sea starts to look more Mediterranean. By 2001, we increase the number of boxes considerably, and Europe begins to really look like Europe. Greenland looks like Greenland. Iceland's looking more Icelandic. Svalbard is looking more Svalbardic. By 2007, we increased the resolution further, and now that we're approaching the sixth report due next year, the Meteorological Office has now installed 3 new Cray XC40 supercomputers. And when linked together, these are capable of 14,000 trillion calculations a second, yet this is still not quite fast enough. One of the reasons we have trouble predicting weather, say for tomorrow here, is that we don't allocate significant computer time to that. We have fairly simple models, they give us simple answers, and that's what we're going to deal with. That's what we know about tomorrow. That's what we know about the coming weekend. If we put a supercomputer on this task, we could figure out much more accurately what the weather is going to be like in 3 or 4 days, but it might take 3 or 4 days to get to that answer. By then, we just look outside. So we're getting better. We're getting a lot better, but we still have a long ways to go. When we talk about climate variation, we can talk about short-term regional variability, things that happen in an area, the climate of Saskatoon, the climate of Budapest, how that changed over the last 10 years or 20 years. The most common example that's also the most familiar to people is El Niño Southern Oscillation, or ENSO. This is coupled with La Niña. That's the opposite scenario. El Niño is when there's significant warm water off the coast of South America. It's pushed across the Pacific by wind, and it stops upwelling off the coast of South America. That shuts down productivity off the coast of South America. The phytoplankton go away, the zooplankton go away, the anchovies go away, the seals and the seabirds go away, and so do the fishermen. We've known about this oscillation since around 1500 AD or CE. We've got about a 500-year history with it, yet we're still trying to figure out why it happens. One of the changes would be related to variability in the tropical ocean heat pump. The best known example of this would be El Niño La Niña cyclicity, also known as ENSO. And what we'll be talking about here for a minute or so is the sloshing back and forth of Pacific surface waters that are warm. During an El Niño event, warm water pools off the coast of South America. Generally, this happens around Christmas time, and this is how it obtained its name, El Niño, the child, referring to the Christ child in this case, a name given to this phenomena by Portuguese fishermen around 500 years ago. In La Niña, the opposite scenario, the warm water pools off of the coast of Australia and throughout Indonesia. During these time periods, there's significant upwelling. Biological productivity is very high, whereas during El Niño, biological productivity comes to nearly a stop. Upwelling is cut off, and that upwelling, not being able to bring nutrients to the surface, squashes the whole food chain. Let's take a look here at El Niño over a period of years, starting in January of 2015. What you're going to see is some warm water depicted by these darker reddish colors pooling off the coast of South America. Ultimately, this is going to break down. This cap of warm water is going to be replaced by cold water via upwelling. And as it's displaced, it moves to the west towards Australia and Indonesia. So let's roll the tape. Here we have the warm water approaching South America. It's pooling, cutting off upwelling, which cuts off the nutrients off the coast of South America, shutting down the herring fishery. Seals and seabirds disappear. Now the upwelling has begun in earnest. Lots of nutrients coming to the surface in this cold water, and the herring come back, the seabirds come back, the seals come back, and the fishermen come back. Longer time scales, these are 1,000-year, multi-1,000-year time scales, include changes in deep ocean circulation. Our best known example of an ocean current, at least from our perspective as North Americans, is the Gulf Stream. And you can see that transecting here. from the Florida Straits past the east coast of the United States up to maritime Canada, ultimately splitting up around Iceland, becoming part of the North Atlantic Drift, and ultimately getting entrained in the East Greenland Current after it submerges. We'll take a look at a video here. Let's take a look at the Gulf Stream now, how it develops off the coast of Florida, and how it affects climate at the higher latitudes. So here we have the Gulf Stream beginning in the Straits of Florida and transecting to the higher latitudes. This is going to influence all of the east coast of the United States and maritime Canada, as well as northern Europe. But it has a global signature. Here we can see the Gulf Stream moving to the higher latitudes. The water is going to cool off. As it cools off, it becomes denser. It's already salty because it became salty off the coast of Florida and in the Caribbean. As this water sinks, it becomes part of the deep water mass that travels the world's ocean basins. Here's a schematic of the water increasing in salinity. It's cooling off at the higher latitudes. And this high density water sinks and then traverses the world's ocean basins.